Hi, everybody. Welcome to the genealogy series at the Spartanburg County Public Library System. I'm Charity Rouse, the Director of Local History and Genealogy Services here at the library. And it is great to join with you tonight and in the recording online. And we're going to be talking about the US Federal Census, 1900 to 1950. And we've got some things that we're going to cover that were kind of loose ends from last month's presentation. So if you haven't seen last month's presentation on the US population census 1790 to 1890, do check out that recording. It should be up on the website on YouTube. But we'll be taking a look at some Indian censuses for those on reservations, as well as a couple of additional examples from the supplemental schedules that I had not included examples of last time, and people had some questions. So all of these census population schedules can be found on Ancestry and Ancestry Library Edition. Indexes are on Family Search, images are on Family Search for some of them. Find My Past, My Heritage, National Archives and Records Administration at archives.gov has the images. They're a little harder to dig down to there, but it can be done. And I do want to just put a plug in for additional resources for using census information and locating census information if you're having trouble, can be found at stevemorse.org, not Steve Morse, guitar player. SteveMorse.org has genealogy resources and statistics and immigration resources and all sorts of fun things. So just a brief overview reminding us of where we've been with the census. The first census was taken in 1790 after we had our American Revolution and became a country. It was authorized by Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution of the United States. Because if you're going to be a democratic republic, you got to figure out who can vote and who can represent and how many people go in the House of Representatives and all of that. So these are taken every 10 years in the 0 years. And the purpose is to apportion seats in the House of Representatives. And the article in the Constitution does allow for taxation, although direct taxation did not happen until much later. Now, it includes the whole number of free persons, but excludes Indians not taxed, depending on federal status and citizenship of various things, which is beyond our scope tonight, but just know there are some exceptions. And then, obviously, in the last class, we talked about the 3/5 compromise and that information. There was an Indian census for many years, and we'll see some examples of that tonight. And that was for those on reservations. And it was supposed to be taken yearly, but not always. And not all of them survive. That's the general trope of genealogy. Not all the records survived. And usually the record you need didn't survive. But that's the way life goes sometimes. There is a privacy restriction, and the census is released 72 years after it's taken. So 1950 was released on April 1st, 2022. And 1960 will be in 2032. Not all censuses ask the same questions, and that's something we're going to look at in more detail momentarily. So one of the schedules that I mentioned last time and didn't have the examples of pulled were the defective, dependent, and delinquent classes, the Triple D. It was only taken in 1880, but it's got some fun stuff. So there are 7 schedules or parts of this particular census, and it does work back and forth with the main population census. So you will be able to, if you look at this, be able to go back to the population census for that same enumeration district and be able to find this person. This just gives more information. So the Schedule 1 is insane inhabitants. So these are, let me get my cheat sheet. These are insane persons were described as suffering from mania or delirium, melancholia or depression, paresis or general paralysis, dementia, epilepsy, or dipsomania, which was an uncontrollable desire for spirituous liquors, alcohol. And so it's just one of those, there's a lot in it, but hey. The bottom of that page, the second schedule, is listed as idiots. We are using the language on the form. That was what they called them of the day. And an idiot was defined as a person with extreme mental deficiency in infancy or childhood. Causes of idiocy could include scarlet fever, measles, meningitis, blow to the head, a fall, or a fright. Demented persons were to be classified as insane, not as idiots. So brain injuries, that kind of thing. And these examples come from Darlington County. I figured if I did Spartanburg County, somebody might have an ancestor on there and that might not go over well. Deaf mutes is the third schedule, defined as a person who could not speak because he could not hear sufficiently enough to learn to speak. So that is what that one is. And then blind is the next section, the fourth. And that included the totally blind and the semi-blind. So people with significant sight loss. And in the 1880s, that was a lot more of a challenge than today. We have technology that has helped us today. So the fifth schedule is homeless children. Arrest records of children in orphanages, and they wanted to determine those from respectable as opposed to vicious backgrounds. So there's a list. So if your ancestor was an Okay, I'm back. I'm back. Cheryl, you are live. Okay, sorry about that. But homeless children, they were trying to figure out the good from the bad, and just see who was where. Okay, the sixth schedule included the inhabitants in prison. So the enumerators were instructed to direct the questions to the warden or keeper of the prison rather to the prisoner. So you're not getting firsthand information, you're getting secondhand information. But if your person happened to be in prison at the time, then hey, they're on this list or should be on this list if they were in prison at that specific date. And then the seventh schedule is the pauper and indigent inhabitants of institutions, poorhouses, or asylums, or boarded at public expense in private houses. So who are the people who are being cared for by the locality or the state? And so these were listed here. And if they were at the poorhouse, that does open up some more, possibly some more records that you might find. And at the bottom, there were some totals at the bottom of the page. So that's a little bit about the Triple D schedule in 1880. We have Indian censuses on reservations, and these can be found at Ancestry, and Ancestry does give an overall time frame of 1885 to 1940. Most of the 1940 ones are still in the Bureau of Indian Affairs records at National Archives and not actually digitized on Ancestry or other places. And there are a couple other collections. If you go to the card catalog on Ancestry and do a keyword search for Indian census, you should be able to find some additional resources if you are interested in these records. There are no South Carolina residences in this collection because you had to be on a federal reservation or in good standing with a federal reservation, and state level doesn't count. So, and depending on time period, a lot of Indian tribes were not federally recognized. There are a bunch in Virginia who in the last decade or so have finally gotten federal recognition, but they've had state recognition since the 1600s. So it just depends. And as I said, for Indian censuses and other records for those on reservations, more information can be found at the National Archives and Records Administration, archives.gov, and they would be in the Bureau of Indian Affairs Records series. They're working to get indexes up online. They're working to get stuff digitized, but it's a lot of paper because it's all of the correspondence for each of the agents, Indian agents that were appointed to the various tribes and reservations. But this is what one of the Cherokee, early in the first roll of Cherokee, this is from 1895, and Laura Lee is the mother, and faintly in the Indian name, it says head of family white. So he wasn't on the census because he wasn't native. And so good to know. But Laura Lee had children, and Alonzo, etc. And some of them are stepsons and stepdaughters. And then there are sons and daughters. So on this particular census, we do not see tribal membership or anything. They are just living on the reservation. So the stepsons, if head of household is white, stepsons and daughters are probably white as well. But we don't know that from only this document. So additional research would need to be done. And you do see that there is a name place for Indian name as well as English name, and relationship to head of household and their age. Generally, they are listed in family groups by descending age order. This is a couple of pages later in that same census, and you will note that they didn't fill in the top of the page information for all of the pages. So you may have to go back a few pages to see what record set it is in if you have just clicked in from a name search on Ancestry. And again, it can be very helpful information if you're looking for folks on the reservation. Now, this one is an Indian roll from the latter period, I believe it's 1933, and then I have an example from 1935. These are from the Potawatomi tribe in Kansas, and on this page, you see, number one, they're typed. Number two, they ask some different questions. So you get the number on the page, you get name, sex, age at last birthday, tribe, because they might not be from that tribe, but they might be living at on that reservation. Degree of blood. So this is where blood quotient comes into the mix. And it is largely a European white imposition on the tribes, but It is recorded in these censuses on some of them. And then the marital status, relationship to head of family. If they are not at the jurisdiction where they are enrolled, it will tell you where that is, largely blank on this particular page. Address if elsewhere. If they are a ward of the state or a ward, if they have an allotment annuity or identification number, if that has been issued. These are unallotted in 1933. 1935, actually no family of the person at the bottom of the page, the Wawasek. Wawiatan is another one of the families that I came in contact with when I lived in Kansas, which is kind of why I picked Potawatomi, but I knew that they were here. So in the left-hand column of numbers, there are additional numbers there that may be a tribal enrollment number. I'm not positive on that one. Some of them may be a school ID number. But again, you get name and the various columns. And so, and you see in that right-hand column, the third entry down has a number, and that, if I'm remembering correctly, may refer to tribal school or Indian schools. So, but you can find out lots of different information. So these do not exist for all tribes for all years, even though in 1884, there was a law passed that they were supposed to, the Indian agents were supposed to do these censuses yearly for all tribal people in their jurisdiction. So these can be helpful, but again, if someone is living off the reservation, they may not and probably will not appear in these, but they might. So again, always worth a check. So on to the federal population censuses between 1900 and 1950. These are the general population schedules. Once we hit 1900, there are not many special schedules at all. Although I ran across a collection in Ancestry and didn't pull one. But in 1930, there's a special schedule for people who are serving in the Merchant Marine. So if that affects your people in 1930, check that. So just an overview of the US Federal Census in the 20th century. Just as a reminder, in 1892, Ellis Island opened. Now, Ellis Island was the second federal immigration center. It replaced Castle Garden, which had opened in 1855. A huge wave of migration into this country came in beginning circa 1880, 1870s, 1880, and into the 1920s. And it was just waves of different immigrants. And so many of them did come through Ellis Island, but here's your, exception. There were plenty of other ports of entry. So don't just assume if you can't find them at Ellis Island that they didn't come in, because there were many East Coast ports as well as ports along the southern borders. New Orleans had a huge immigration center. Galveston, Texas, San Francisco, I believe that one was Angel Island, Portland and Seattle also had immigration centers, as I believe. So there were plenty. And then you get Baltimore and Boston and all of the East Coast. So, and Ellis Island was active 1892 into the, I believe, early 50s. So 1900 to 1930, everyone was asked the same set of questions, starting in 1940 and 1950 and continuing. Some people were asked supplemental questions. And then 1960 to 1990, plus the 2000, 2010, 2020 are not yet available because the 72-year privacy rule allows for that to be restricted. And but that's a similar setup to 1950 with a certain number of people on a page getting supplemental questions. And then in the 2000s, starting right after the 2000 census, they developed the American Community Survey, which is sent to a representative sample of households each month. And I'll talk more about that at the very end. So in 1900, here's a picture of the whole page, and here's a picture that's a little bit zoomed in with my Allen family. The columns include locations. So in cities, the road, the house number, and then the household number visited, family number visited, the name of each person living at this residence as of June 1st. So we still haven't stabilized on it being April 1st. Every time they pick a different line in the sand. So do pay attention as to what the date of the census is supposed to be. The relationship to head of household, personal description, including color, sex, month and year of birth. It's the only census that has asked that to this point. Age at last birthday, whether they are single, married, widowed, or divorced. The number of years married. Females are asked, mother of how many children, and how many children are still living. It asks for the birthplace, i.e. state or country, of the person, their father, and their mother. There's a section for citizenship, which includes year of immigration to US, number of years in the US, and naturalization, which is basically a yes or a no. Have you been naturalized? Then there is occupation, or trade or profession. So it's just one field, so you get a general day laborer, or at school, boarding house. My family there in about the fourth family down is running a boarding house. And that age, that trade or profession is for anyone age 10 and older. So remember, work didn't start at 18 or 16. Children were working in 1900. Months not employed in the previous year. Education, if they attended school in months within the last year. And can they read? Can they write? Can they speak English? Again, lots of immigration from around the world. Ownership of home, you could read or write any language, but could you speak English? Ownership of home, whether it was owned or rented, owned free or mortgaged, was it a farm or a house? And then the number of the farm schedule. Unfortunately, the 20th century farm schedules I haven't seen surviving anywhere, but keep looking because maybe somebody will find them in a box in a corner somewhere. In 1910, it was similar questions. And again, the road is usually written sideways in that left-hand column if it is a named road. The house number, if there was one, household number visited, family number visited, the name of each person living at this residence as of April. My note says 15, probably the 1st. Relationship to head of household, the personal description of sex, color, age at last birthday, single, married, widowed, divorced, the number of years of present marriage, the mother of how many children and how many still living. Remember, childhood mortality was still a major situation in this time period. So they were really trying to get a handle on how to better help with maternal health and childhood health. The birthplace of the father, their mother, and the birthplace of the person, their father and mother. And then citizenship questions were the year of immigration to the US and whether they were naturalized. Occupation, trade, or profession. And then there was a category for the general category of industry. Were they an employee, employer working on their own account? If they were an employee, whether out of work on April 15th, the number of weeks out of work during 1909, I'd have to do a little bit more research, but it seems like there was a little mini depression of sorts there. And their education, can they read, can they write, have they attended school since September 1909, so just that school year. And ownership of home, whether it's owned or rented, owned free or mortgaged, and whether it's a farm or a house, the number of farms schedule. And then we have a section for veteran status, whether a survivor of the Union or Confederate Army or Navy, and then it asks whether blind, deaf, and dumb. So again, asking some of these questions that we saw on previous censuses. Veteran status is one that appears periodically, but it's not consistent. In 1920, and I will tell you, if you look at the top of this, the enumerator up in the right-hand corner there, name of the enumerator, that is my great-grandmother, and she does have kind of atrocious handwriting. Her R's and her S's look very similarly. I could not find her on this census for a very long time because she was transcribed as Cassie Rover instead of Carrie Rouse. I finally looked her mother up because her father was deceased at that point, and there she is in the household. So she was a young widow and reasonably literate, just had crabby handwriting. So before you complain too much about somebody's handwriting, do check that they aren't a relative. Now, I inherited crabby handwriting from her probably, so it's, you know, whatever it is. But in 1920, they're asking similar questions such as the name of the road, the house number, household number visited, family number visited. Again, the name of each person living at the residence as of January 1, the relationship to the head of household, the tenure, so whether that was home owned or rented, if owned free or mortgaged, personal description, sex, color, age at last birthday, single, married, widowed, divorced. And then citizenship, they ask for a year of immigration to the US, whether they are naturalized or alien, just means non-citizen, does not mean purple Martian. The year of naturalization. For education, it asks if they had attended school since September 1919, whether they can read, can write, the birthplace and mother tongue of the person, their father and mother, and whether able to speak English. They ask for the occupation or trade, profession, and then a general category of industry. So you could be a dry goods hauler for groceries or hauler for a lumber mill or those types of categories. If you were at a textile mill, you would have been a spinner, textile industry. So it was helping them kind of figure out gross domestic product and how many people were working in various industries and things. Whether you were an employer, whether you were salary or wage worker, or working on your own account, i.e. self-employed, and then the number of a farm schedule if you happened to be on a farm. Oh, the family's at the bottom of that page, sorry. And you see listed as relationship to head of household, you do see borders listed at the end of the family. and at least one of those boarders did marry one of the daughters. So, it's just one of those things. I don't know whether it's on this census or the next. Franklin Watkins was his name. In 1930, again, very similar format, these large pages of ledgers. But 1930, if you see at the bottom, you start getting keys to some of the questions. So if you don't know what that abbreviation is, like NA means naturalized, it doesn't mean not applicable. Check the bottom for a key on these 20th century censuses, because it may tell you what that means rather than you making a guess. So here is the listing, and the family listing is there in the lower part. Again, it asks for road, house number, household number visited, family number visited, name of each person living at the residence as of April 1st, relationship of head of household, and then home data to the head of household, whether the home was owned or rented, the value of home or monthly rental. So sometimes you see somebody with a larger value, like thousands of dollars, and then the next person is $50. Well, $50 was their monthly rent, while as the multi-thousands was the price of the home because they owned it. 1930 asked if they had a radio set. Now, remember, while we are in the Depression already, it has started with back in November of 1929, these questions were already approved and printed and being distributed before the crash happened. So the radio set was the big thing. It was the big screen TV of the day. It was the new technology for communication. So it was an important status symbol. And so they asked whether people had a radio set, because that was a good indicator of, well, had been a good indicator of household wealth. Whether they lived on a farm. The personal description was similar to previous, with sex, color, age at last birthday, marital condition, age at first marriage, not age at this marriage, age at first marriage. That can sometimes help you know, oops, this is a second spouse or a third spouse. Look at all the figures and make sure things add up correctly. Even though people fudged on their age on the census, it was usually not that blatantly fudged. For education, they add college. So attended school or college since September 1929. Again, whether they can read and write. The place of birth for person, father, and mother. The language spoken in home before coming to the US. Nothing on this page because they were all in South Carolina. But in areas with higher immigration in this period, you would see a mixture of languages there. Citizenship, it asked year of immigration to US and whether they were naturalized or alien. Again, they asked whether they can speak English. And they did try to pick census takers who spoke languages that would be prevalent in that enumeration district. And the enumeration districts were picked to be relatively coverable by the enumerator with the technology of the day, whether it be horse or car or on foot. So just depends. Again, they ask about occupation, trade, or profession, and then a general category of industry. The class of worker, which was, are you paid? Are you wage? Are you salary? Are you self-employed? That kind of thing. And then veterans, yes or no. What war or expedition? So they wanted to know what were you a veteran from? And then the number of farms scheduled. So 1940 gets more complicated because 2 people on every page get ask the supplemental questions. And we'll talk about those on the next screen because it was too much to put on here, but you'll see those at the bottom. Again, they ask similar demographic information with road, house number, and then they do flip-flop what information is asked in which order. But they get household number, visited, home owned or rented, value of home if owned, or the monthly rental if rented. Is this a farm? Name each person living at this residence as of April 1st. Relationship to the head of household. Personal description of sex, color, age at last birthday, marital status. The education section asks if they attended school or college since September 1939. The highest grade completed. This can be really interesting for your ancestors. The place of birth for the person, their citizenship, if they are a foreign born, and then we're at 1940. We're a decade into the Great Depression at this point. So they asked, what was your residence as of April 1st, 1935? Because people moved. And often people had moved away, and by 1940, they were back where they started. And so they were trying to get a grapple with everything and how people had moved around the country. And so the demographics of this is they ask for the name, if it is a city, town, or village of 2,500 people or greater, or R means rural. So if it's under that 2,500 people in population, really small town, or what we would consider rural, that's where that R comes from. Persons 14 and over are the category for those who have to answer the employment questions. Were they working for pay or profit in private or non-emergency government work during the week of March 24th through 30th? If not, were they assigned to public emergency work, such as WPA, Works Progress Administration or Process Administration, the NYA, National Youth Association, I believe is what that one is, CCC, which was the Civilian Conservation Corps, or there were a whole bunch of other alphabet soups that were putting people to work for subsistence wages, but at least it was keeping people fed, and it was how a lot of fantastic projects did get built. But they were asking whether you were working for one of those agencies during the week of March 24th through 30th. If not a yes in the previous two categories, were they seeking work or did they have a job? If no to the last four questions, then were they involved in housework, school, or unable to work, or something else? So then they asked, what is your occupation, trade, or profession? And the general category of industry. So if you were working for the WPA, maybe you were working as a photographer or a writer or an artist, or you might be working for the CCC as a timber harvester or building walls on the Skyline Drive, stone walls on the Skyline Drive, or building cabins on the Parkway, those types of things. What class of worker were you paid? Were you government? Were you salaried? That kind of thing. The number of full-time weeks worked in 1939 and your income in 1939. And then there's a category that if you had more than $50 income from sources other than money, wages, or salary, i.e. if you were a landlord and were getting rent money from people, or you had investments that were actually paying something during the Great Depression, those types of income categories. And then again, farm schedule, if you had one. And that was forgot to take it out of that first one. Anyway, on the supplemental questions, they only asked 2 people on each page in 1940 the additional questions. But this is where they asked for the place of birth of father and mother, the mother tongue, veterans. Is this person a veteran of the US military forces, or the wife, widow, or under 15-year-old child of a veteran? If yes, if child is the veteran, if the child of a veteran, is the veteran father dead? War or military service, which war? And then some Social Security questions, because Social Security had started in 1935, or started paying out benefits in 1936. So Social Security wanted to know, does this person have a federal Social Security number? Were deductions for federal old age insurance or railroad deductions made for federal old age insurance or railroad retirement? If no, were deductions made from a portion of their salary? Then you get the usual occupation, usual industry, usual class of worker. And then all women who are or have been married. Has this woman been married more than once? Age at first marriage, and the number of children ever born, not including stillbirths. So, if you happen to be on a page where people answered those questions, they happen to be on that particular line, or you get really lucky and it's your ancestor who hits one of those lines, it can be really helpful sometimes. In 1950, this is the newest one that has just come out, they asked lots of long questions, as you can see. And again, the first part is pretty standard. Road, house number, household number visited. Is it a farm or a ranch? If not, is it on 3 or more acres? And then for all persons, the name of each person living at this residence as of April 1st, relationship to the head of household, race, sex, age at last birthday, marital status, where born, state or foreign country. If foreign born, is he naturalized? And if foreign born, oh, sorry, reread my previous line, sorry about that. Persons 14 and over, what was this person doing most of last week? Were they working, keeping house, or something else? Did they work at all last week? If no, were they looking for work? If no, do they have a job or business? How many hours did he work last week? Their usual occupation, trade, profession, and the general category of industry, the class of worker. Remember, we're coming out of World War II. We had a lot of women who went to work in the factories while a lot of our men were overseas serving in the military. And a lot of the men coming back from the war had trouble finding jobs because many women decided they enjoyed having income of their own and work outside of the house. And as suburbia was growing, starting to need the 2-income household. So the supplemental questions get a lot more in depth, and they ask them of 6 people per page. So they decided 2 people wasn't enough, 6 people. Always check the page for notes from the census taker at the very top of this clip. You will see some notes that the census taker wrote on the form about who wasn't home or who they found, or, oh, this family ended up on that page kind of situation. So the sample lines is what they call in 1950 versus supplemental questions, which is what they called them in 1940. My great uncle Jasper was lucky number line 3. So his answers are the top line of these answers. So, was he living in the same house a year ago? Yes. If no, was he living on a farm a year ago? Was he living in the same county a year ago? If no, what county and state? Well, yeah, no additional information there for me. What country were his father and mother born in? The US. What is the highest grade of school that he has attended? Secondary 10, so 10th grade of high school. Did he finish this grade? Yes. Has he attended school at any time since February 1st? No. For persons 14 plus? If yes, in item 17, how many weeks looking for work? Item 17 was the, are you looking for work? Are you unemployed? And he was not, he was employed. He had worked 52 years the last year, and it says $1,000 in the how much did he earn. It is crossed out, so I am not sure completely why it was crossed out. But anyway, and he did not receive money from interest, dividends, veterans allowances, etc. And then he is not the head of household. His mother is the head of household. He was a bachelor. But if he had been, they would have asked the income questions for the entire household for those 3 previous categories. If male, did he serve in the US Armed Forces during World War II, World War I, or any other time, including the present service? Line 34 got even more questions. So that bottom supplemental question continues across the same questions as the top 5 got, and then the bottom section on the right-hand side of the page is additional questions. And those include, has the person been married more than once? How many years current status? So if they are currently widowed, divorced, married, or single, how many years current status? And if female, how many children has she born? So they keep asking more and more questions. So what do they do with the answers to these questions? So let's talk a little bit about privacy, because our expectations of privacy in the 21st century are very different than the expectations in the 19th and 20th centuries. So in an 18th or 17th century. Anyway, in 1790, the census had no privacy guarantee. Remember, it was just name of household and tick marks and categories of ages and genders, free and enslaved. And 1790 to 1840 were posted publicly so that you could check that the census taker wrote down the right information for your family, because you wanted to have all of the representation in Congress that you could get for your population area. In 1850, because they started asking for the names of every person and ages for every person in the household, it was not posted publicly. In 1880, there were additional privacy guarantees that were given. 1952 was when they put the 72-year rule in place for the release of the census. Prior to that, you could use a census to verify your Social Security, your age for Social Security, because of course birth certificates didn't start in many places in the United States till after about 1910. So 1915 here in South Carolina. So you had to have other ways to be able to prove, at least in some manner, what your age was. 1954, they added Title 13 in the US Code, which standardized all of the privacy stipulations to that point. Up until 1976, the director of the Census Bureau can disclose information to other governmental departments. This is how we ended up with a couple of situations in the first half of the 20th century that, I don't really argue with them using the 1910 census as a basis for the first draft information for World War I to kind of figure out who was approximately the right age male. Okay, it's a little bit of an overreach, but not a huge overreach. However, during World War II, under the War Powers Act, information about Japanese residents led to the internment camps for primarily Japanese immigrants. While they allowed Japanese to serve in the army, there were citizenship concerns because they were not allowed to be citizens for the most part. Chinese were excluded longer, but Asians in particular were good enough to come and work and build the Transcontinental Railroad and work in the ports and all of that, but not good enough to be citizens. So in the early part of the 20th century, late part of the 19th century. So that was, in my opinion, an overstep of the use of the census information to determine who needed to be in internment camps, because none of those people needed to be in internment camps. I'm being judgy almost a century later. Well, 80 years later. Since then, the privacy protections for census information have been significantly strengthened, and loopholes allowing the earlier misuse were closed in the 1950s through 70s. So it is pretty difficult to get any census information that is not specifically your own, but you can. If you need to prove that you were living in a certain place at a certain time, were a certain age, in one of the census 0 years, there is a process for you to get your own census information off of the censuses that are less than 72 years old. I haven't done it. I think there's a decent fee to it, but sometimes you need it for a passport or something. So there are ways for you to get your own, but you're not going to be able to get your grandparents or whoever's. It's not for genealogy use. It is literally for your own record information. So how did the citizenship question change over the decades? This was a big deal in 2020 because they wanted to have a citizenship question, and a lot of people didn't like that idea. So some highlights, all of these pieces are typed out in your handout, so I'm not going to read them all to you. But in 1820, the heads of households were asked how many foreign-born people not naturalized were in their homes. In 1870, is the person a male citizen of the United States of 21 years or upwards? And everybody was asked that. In 1900, census workers asked about the naturalization status of foreign-born men aged 21 or older. And 1920, it changes to naturalization status of foreign-born people. Remember, 1920, we were looking at, hey, women are getting the right to vote. By 1923, the K-22, I think active in 23, the Cable Act affected naturalization for women. While you could still lose your citizenship by marrying a non-citizen, you could not gain citizenship by marrying a citizen. You had to do the naturalization process and all of the steps on your own versus as an adjunct to your husband or father. So, a little bit about state censuses. Mentioned some of this last time. Not all states did them. There's not a standard format for them. South Carolina has fragments from 1829, 1839, 1869, and 1875. Other states like Kansas did censuses from 1855 with the territorial census all the way up until 1925 on the years ending in fives. So if you were researching in Kansas, you have a every 5-year chance that your person might show up in the records. So that can be helpful as people moved west. We do have the surviving fragments of the South Carolina censuses that have been microfilmed on microfilm. They are also, I believe, available on Ancestry. Family Search has some as well. State archives would have the most, as well as local libraries. Like us, we have some of them. So it's just something to take a look at. Note, Spartanburg County did not have surviving pages from this. Here's a page from Union County. And this is the 1869 one. And the thing about this is we're back to name of person, head of household, and the number of people in white, colored, males and females, and basic demographic information. So you're not getting a whole lot of information, but it may be enough to be able to say this is the right person in the right time, and it fills in a date that you needed in your timeline. So if you took the census in 2020, you will notice that it was very much only the first little household demographic, individual demographic information. I don't even think I had to answer what industry I work in. Or if I did, it was just one thing and not extra questions. Well, there's this thing called the American Community Survey. And beginning after the 2000 federal census, the American Community Survey took the place of these long form questions. So all of these supplementary questions that they started in 1940, 1950 continue through 2000. That some people get a long form questionnaire and some people just get the basics. And that is sent to a statistically significant number of households every month. According to census.gov, 1 in 38 households receives the survey each year. So you've got a chance at least once out of every 38 years that your household will be picked for that survey. I have filled that survey in back when I lived in Kansas, and it asked a lot of detailed questions about value of your house, mortgage, about levels of school, about where you work, what your salary is. Are you own accord? Are you wage? Are you salary? Are you hourly or salary? So a lot of things like that. So it's just one of those things that instead of waiting every 10 years to do this, they are constantly gathering the information. And it's one of those reports that, along with a number of reports, goes into things like unemployment, gross domestic product, all of those, how is our economy doing reports. It's one of those. So, and it is run by census.gov. And if you do get it, it will be from census.gov. And it is a federal requirement to fill it in and send it back. So please don't throw that one in the trash. It helps us all. So, are there questions? I see a couple things in chat and they might be, Cheryl, if you can post the handout again. I think somebody came in after you posted it. Okay. Oh.
Actually, there are no posted questions that I see.
Cheryl posted a picture of our aluminum Christmas tree. Yeah, we are going pretty Charlie Brown with that. It's that mid-century modern kind of thing, because we had Leslie's program coming up on mid-century Christmas traditions. So that's one of the reasons why this part of the census ended up in December. So, it's kind of fun. So, yep.
Well, I found the, oh goodness. I found something interesting earlier in the program. Now I can't remember what it is. But anyway, then I also learned about, now I've never had anyone come in of Japanese ethnicity and asking for this information, but that's a pretty cool thing to know about the internment
Yeah.
stuff. And so I'll keep that in mind if
Yeah.
anybody should ever ask about that kind of stuff.
Well,
So.
and the other year, when the National Genealogical Society conference was in Sacramento, it was our first one back in person after the main shutdown. And there weren't a whole lot of people there, but it was a really good conference. And I learned so much about California and West Coast genealogy and resources. You know, we hear about Ellis Island all the time. We don't hear about Angel Island, which is the West Coast equivalent. And so, and it's just hearing stories of survivors of the Japanese internment camps. And I was familiar with them because I've been a Trekkie and a fan of George Takei. And he and his family were in one of the internment camps when he was a child. And he has been very outspoken about that experience and advocated for the museums that they're doing. And I think, if I remember correctly, he was in Manzanar, which was in the Midwest, maybe in Arkansas. I mean, they moved them all over the country to intern them and conscripted all of their belongings. And some of these were people who had lived in the United States legally for a couple generations. And it was just, it was a very dark time. We have a history of treating other people badly here in the United States, whether it be our native peoples, First Peoples, our African American brethren, our Asian brethren, and sisters. It's just, yeah. And the Irish, and every wave of immigration has gotten some pushbacks. So people think that stuff that's happening today with the southern border is something new, and it's not, unfortunately. So anyway, different soapbox, different questions. But one of the reasons they were asking about all of those immigration and naturalization questions in the census was because they were trying to get a handle on how many languages, what are the resources that we need to put toward these communities, because these are the languages that we need to send somebody in prepared to speak in order to help get these people acclimated to the US and to hopefully English as a shared language, and that kind of thing. So it gets interesting. So
cool. Thank you.
Are there
that was a good program. I appreciate it. Not right now.
Everybody learned something cool, because I learned some things today as I was doing the final brush up of the program. One of the things I love about doing the programs is I learn stuff too, and it helps me be a better genealogist. So I appreciate y'all coming along with me for learning more stuff. So
okay,
well
that seems to be it.
Okay,
thanks everybody.
Hit record off, and we'll see everybody on the second Monday for Vital Records Resources in January. Thanks so much.
Oops. Well, stop recording. There it is. Okay.